Chapter 1116, Familiar Gaze. Lovia's response made Joshua even more wary. He looked at the other members of the expedition team and anxiously asked,
"Did any of you hear any abnormal footsteps?"
With thunder god's roar and a broadsword in hand, Derek recalled for a few seconds and shook his head in denial. Hayim, who held the unshadowed crucifix in his hand, looked at the sealed artifact that was still glowing and replied,
"Perhaps it's your hallucination."
"No, I heard it very clearly."
The scarlet-gloved Joshua frowned and expressed his opinion. Upon hearing this, Demon Hunter Colin, who was walking right in front, half turned around and calmly instructed,
"Hayim and Tiona, check on Joshua's condition."
"Yes, Your Excellency."
Hayim immediately walked to Joshua and pressed the unshadowed crucifix, which appeared to be a manifestation of pure light against his teammate's forehead. However, this sealed artifact didn't undergo any changes. Immediately following that, the wine, red-haired female warrior, Antiona, came to the side of Joshua and raised her left hand. There was a pale gold bracelet around her wrist. On it were 3 small bells covered in golden scales. The tinkling sounds that sounded calmed Joshua's heart. He was no longer as tense and impatient.
"No problem."
Antiona cast her gaze towards the chief, Colin Iliad. 2 complex dark green symbols appeared in Colin's eyes. He looked at Joshua for a few seconds before nodding and saying,
"It might not be an illusion, but you have to be careful if any abnormalities arise within you."
Seeing the chief supporting him, Joshua secretly heaved a sigh of relief.
"All right."
After the doubts were temporarily put away, the City of Silver's expedition team continued down the staircase that was covered in the glow of sunset, one level after another. Suddenly, everyone heard a groan. From the corner of his eye, Derek Berg saw Joshua raise his hands and strangle his neck. As he was a Dawn Paladin, he had immense strength. Just as he let out a grunt, his hands snapped his neck. With a gloomy and twisted expression, Joshua collapsed, his eyes filled with disbelief. The person who killed him was himself. Although Derek and the others didn't manage to react in time, their years of training and the experience they had gained from exploring the depths of the darkness made them instinctively take up battle positions, wary of any subsequent attacks. Then they heard a muffled grunt. It was from Shepherd Elder Lovia. The facial muscles of the woman with long, silver-gray hair tightened as obvious twitching and squirming appeared, as though another face had grown out. She plopped to the ground on the wide staircase as she grimaced with indescribable pain. Her hands moved slowly but uncontrollably as she clenched her neck. Just as Lovia was about to exert her strength, 2 swords that were smeared with silver-gray ointment reached out and pried her palms apart. Demon Hunter Colin, who was already prepared, reacted in time. Lovia's body twitched as she lowered her head even further. Opening her mouth, she spat out pieces of torn flesh and incomplete organs. She took a deep breath, as though she had finally recovered. Then she propped her elbow on the ground and took a step forward, prostrating herself and swallowing the flesh and blood organs that she had just spat out in a pious and humble manner. Demon Hunter Colin, who had several old scars on his face, quietly watched this scene without stopping her. Finally, Lovia looked up and said with her unfocused gray eyes,
"It was degeneration, a form of degeneration that everyone has."
"Do you have a solution?"
Colin asked without any change in his tone. Lovia nodded without hesitation.
"Yes."
As soon as she finished speaking, she used her right hand to grab her left index finger. With a loud snap, she pulled it out and stuffed the blood and bones into her mouth. As she chewed, she muttered,
"The Lord that created everything. The Lord who reigns behind the curtain of shadows, the degenerate nature of all living things."
The honorific name of the true creator. Derek's eyelids twitched when he heard that. He suddenly felt that something subtle was happening around him. The orange glow became more saturated and closer to the color of blood. Above the gray fog, the fool Klein's expression instantly turned solemn. Although he couldn't see anything through his true vision, he could vaguely sense that there was a gaze cast over from afar, causing it to interfere with his observations, thus weakening his clarity and range. In addition, that gaze gave him a strange sense of familiarity.
It's difficult to not be familiar with it. The first half of my life after I transmigrated was to deal with him. His son, his oracle, his wish to descend, the items left behind by him, his crazy ravings, and all sorts of murals related to him.
At that moment, Klein was completely certain that the entity who had begun to focus on the City of Silver's expedition team was none other than the true creator. Frankly speaking, when Lovia began to recite the honorific name of that entity, Klein wanted to directly smite her with lightning storm and eliminate the problem before it appeared. However, he ultimately held back the urge because he wasn't confident that he could finish off the shepherd in one strike. The evil spirit that Lovia had grazed was likely at the level of a Sequence 3. Although it had died a long time ago, its current combined strength was still at the level of Sequence 4. It likely wasn't a problem for her to withstand Lightning Storm, which was close to but not at the angel level for some time. And once the fool couldn't easily kill Lovia, it would be a sign of fear in the eyes of Demon Hunter Colin. In addition, Klein believed that Colin Iliad was happy to see Shepherd Elder Lovia chant the true creator's honorific name. He wanted to use this to put the fool in check and achieve some semblance of balance. This was actually an act of disrespect in front of deities, making it very easy to anger those great existences, but there was nothing that Colin Iliad could do. He couldn't simply trust the fool and the true creator, so he could only try his best by probing them while staying on the edge of a cliff. Only by doing so would the City of Silver not suddenly be destroyed, like the cities that had been buried deep in the darkness, covered with the dust of history.
What a pity. If the unshadowed crucifix was in my hands now, I'd have the chance to instantly kill that Silver Knight evil spirit by using all my strength to activate the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. It's a fundamental restraint.
Klein sighed silently and could only accept this development. He hadn't discovered anything unusual with Joshua until this City of Silver warrior with scarlet gloves strangled himself. Only then did he see his spirit turn dark and gloomy. Just as the Shepherd Elder had said, this was a form of degeneration that he originally had. It was no different from losing himself because of money and beauty, making it very difficult for external forces to detect it.
That staircase should have remnant godhood powers that represent degeneration. They're embedded into the environment, making it difficult to discover and resist. Previously, the stone golem had no spirituality, so it wasn't affected. From the honorific name, the true creator wields control over degeneration. Just his gaze alone is enough to disperse the corresponding powers.
Klein adjusted his mental state and continued to observe the subsequent developments. During this process, he couldn't help but consider a question.
Was the true creator like him now, watching the movements of the City of Silver's expedition team in his divine kingdom? On Earth, this is called a fellow viewer watching the same live stream. If I were to send gifts, would the true creator gift even more?
By making this teasing remark, he tried to ease the nervousness and concern that he felt from having the true creator cast his gaze over. That was a true god. Be it Adam or Amen, they weren't even qualified to be on par with him. At that moment, Shepherd Lovia had already stood up, and her left index finger had also grown back. She looked at Chief Colin Iliad and said,
This region will no longer suffer from degeneration.
This meant that the staircase wasn't that dangerous anymore. Normally, the expedition team would ignore Joshua's corpse. Whether they advanced or retreated, they couldn't afford to waste any time. If they stayed in an extremely dangerous area for too long, the other members would have an accident. However, since the six-member council's Elder Lovia used a tone of certainty to indicate that there were no problems nearby, they could rest and deal with it. Derek put down Haim's broadsword and walked to Joshua's side. After staring for a few seconds, he bent down to pick up his scarlet glove and wore it on his left palm. He still remembered that Joshua was always bragging about the mystical item he had obtained during an expedition. He could also clearly recall that when he left the afternoon town camp, he had said that he would be forced into a marriage after the expedition, with no idea as to who his wife would be. Yet, an hour later, this teammate had turned into a cold corpse. To the people of the City of Silver, this was something that happened frequently. No one cried or broke down. However, there was an emotion that had already seeped into their bones and blood. It was heavy and mixed with grief. They watched as Derek raised his left hand and aimed it at Joshua's corpse. A blazing flame flew out, enveloping the teammate who had been fighting alongside them earlier. After the cremation, Demon Hunter Colin put away the Beyonder characteristic that had seeped out. The rest of the team members grabbed a handful of ashes and placed them into a hidden pocket in their clothes. Amidst the silence, they continued down the stairs and arrived at the bottom of the staircase. There was a towering palace bathed in the glow of dusk. Behind it was a corridor and staircase that led to another area. The palace door was open, and it was pitch black inside. Not a single ray of light could shine inside. Demon Hunter Colin carefully observed for a while before saying,
Just like in the outside world.
What he meant was that the group should use various means to maintain a lit environment and not allow themselves to fall into a state of absolute darkness. Hence, Chaim activated the unshadowed crucifix, allowing it to envelop all of his teammates. At the same time, Antiona lit a lantern and held it in her hand, in case the cross suddenly lost its effectiveness. The group entered the palace and walked through the abnormally empty hall. Their footsteps reverberated into the distance, but there weren't any echoing sounds. As he walked, Derek suddenly felt his eyelids grow heavy as he felt a strong sense of sleepiness. At this moment, he heard the chief's low growl.
Don't fall asleep.
Derek suddenly woke up, snapping out of his fatigued state of not being able to open his eyes. At that moment, a female warrior's body went limp and fell to the ground, as though she had fallen into a deep slumber. Then, she disappeared into thin air and disappeared in front of everyone. Demon Hunter Colin and Shepherd Lovia exchanged looks for a while before shaking their heads and leading the team forward. During this process, they would hurt themselves from time to time, using pain to stay awake. Finally, they passed through a bunch of arches and saw the darkness that couldn't be dispelled up ahead. With the help of the light from the team, they discovered that it was a hall with countless murals drawn. In the middle of the hall was a long, dark red table. Situated around it were high-backed chairs with intricate patterns. Derek felt a baffling sense of familiarity. He immediately came to a realization that this was somewhat similar to the scene at the tarot gathering. Suddenly, balls of light lit up and murmurs sounded around them. Around the hall stood stone pillars that didn't support the dome. Scarlet flames were ignited one after another, illuminating the surroundings in an abnormal manner. The murmurs grew louder, as if they had finally passed through a long and distant space and arrived at their destination. The hall was so lively that it was as if a gathering was held. Around the dark red table, blurry and illusory figures suddenly appeared. A total of 11 figures sat on different high-backed chairs. Chapter 1117, The Strongest Organization. As the flames flickered, Derek and company subconsciously looked at the long, dark red table. The first thing they noticed was the figure closest to them. The figure wore a simple linen robe and had a head of long silver hair and indiscernible facial features. It made Colin, Lavia, and Derek find the figure oddly familiar. In an instant, they felt as though a bolt of lightning struck their minds, illuminating their blurry memories.
Angel of Fate, Ouroboros.
Just as the pupils of the team from the City of Silver dilated, the figure turned around and looked at them. A pair of indifferent eyes immediately occupied their vision as extraordinary, mysterious rings appeared. In a daze, Derek saw a figure in front of him. He was a handsome, radiant, and energetic man. He wore a pure white robe and had short golden hair. With his appearance, the surroundings became abnormally bright. The warm feeling was like a ray of light, instantly filling every spot. Derek felt as though he had seen the day, as mentioned in legends, momentarily forgetting where he was or what he was doing. The man took a step forward, and his blurry figure overlapped with Derek. Then, Derek sat beside the dark red long table, occupying one of the high-back chairs. He had become the handsome and radiant man who was attending a secret gathering. At the same time, the grizzled City of Silver chief, Colin, whose face was covered in old scars, encountered the same blurry and illusory figure. The figure was 7 to 8 meters tall. He was wearing silver full-body armor, and his eyes were glowing like the light of dawn. He raised the long sword in his hand, letting it press against Colin Iliad's forehead like a scepter. Demon Hunter Colin struggled for a moment, but he quickly calmed down when he was enveloped by the orange light. With that, he and the giant in front of him merged into one. He strode towards the dark red table and sat on the second seat on the right. Shepherd Lovia encountered a man in a long black robe. He had black, curly hair over his shoulders and a pair of eyes that seemed to be covered in shadows. It was difficult to see his face clearly, but the silver threads, complicated patterns, and gorgeous accessories were directly reflected in her mind. Lovia trembled and couldn't help but lower her head, allowing the layers of black wings on the man's back to wrap around her. She became the man and walked to the end of the dark red table. There were 2 high-back chairs with complex patterns placed there. Lovia chose the left one. The remaining members of the City of Silver's expedition team also encountered similar situations, but the figures they faced were different. After they found their seats on both sides of the dark red table, the area around the empty high-back chair at the seat of honor became darker, outlining a female figure that seemed to be shrouded in fog. Right on the heels of that, a voice that seemed to transmigrate from ancient times echoed in the ears of the attendees.
We are trying to redeem ourselves and also maintain the balance of this world. Dissociation and deviation are undoubtedly the most basic order. This is also in line with his thoughts. I can't deny that we all have our own sinister thoughts and desires, but this is very normal. Death and spilling blood are inevitable. In the name of Rose's redemption.
Above the gray fog, Klein listened attentively. He couldn't wait to hear more of the content said by the voice, Sao Biel. However, whether it was the scene or the voice, it began to loop. It was as if it had only been fixed at a section lasting less than a minute. Klein mumbled inwardly as he cast his gaze back at the City of Silver team that were repeating the actions like puppets, approaching the table, sitting down, listening, and leaving.
This is the scene of the establishment of the Rose Redemption. Previously, the Red Angel Evil Spirit said that this was an extremely secretive organization established by a group of corrupted angels. Now, it seems like that isn't the case. The person who said that was probably not Medici, but either Sauron and Einhorn. They actually didn't know much about Rose Redemption.
When the torches around the hall lit up one after another, Klein had already found something unusual with his true vision. He saw the murals on the wall come alive and rapidly expand, overlapping with the hall. It made the table, chairs, and floor tiles that had been cold for thousands of years warm up once again. It made the figures that had once been in this secret meeting cross the borders of time, reviving at their fixed seats, allowing the words from the past to reappear. Many of those figures were familiar to Klein. One of them was the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. This king of angels, who was still a member of the Rose Redemption, was the most lifelike among all the illusory figures. Combined with how the scenes were looping, Klein began to suspect the person who left the murals was Tail Devourer Ouroboros. Klein couldn't help but lampoon Ouroboros in his mind.
In the previous temple ruins, there were murals left behind by him, likewise for the ruins of the Battle of the Gods. In the Giant King's court, there are similar murals and signs of those powers. I wouldn't believe it if anyone were to say it's not him. Just how much does this King of Angels like murals? He draws them wherever he goes.
The second figure he noticed was sitting beside the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. He was dressed in black armor that seemed to be splashed with blood. He had red hair that resembled fire, looking young and handsome. The reason why he paid attention to this figure was because he had seen it in his dreams. In addition, it was also the most arrogant person among all the figures. Not only did it sit back in its chair, but it also placed its feet on the dark, red, long table. It didn't mind that the surrounding people were high-level figures of the same status. As Klein's thoughts raced, he decided to first rescue the people from the City of Silver, who couldn't exit the looping cycles of fate.
Red Angel, Medici. These are the kings of angels who participated in the secret gathering. Who else is involved?
He had a lot of experience in this aspect. After observing for a few seconds, Klein quickly came to a conclusion.
Yes, the medium to the loop is the hall itself. However, there's no need to attempt to destroy it. As long as it can temporarily break the cycle of fate, the dusk outside will seep in and dispel any abnormalities. They belong to the divine kingdom itself. In terms of status, they can only be stronger or on par with the power left behind by Ouroboros.
After flipping a gold coin for a divination, he immediately spread his spirituality towards the crimson star representing the sun. Derek Berg's spirit body immediately tore through the cycle of fate, creating an invisible crack. The orange glow from the light of dusk outside the palace immediately surged into the hall from the window up high. Without waiting for Little Sun to figure out his situation, for fear that the true creator would lock onto him, Klein didn't hesitate to let him return to the real world. Derek snapped out of his daze and realized that he had unknowingly sat down at the side of the dark red table. He looked up blankly and saw the chief, Elder Lovia, Chaim, and Tiona, and the others. He realized that there were still certain traces of confusion on their faces. Thinking back to his experience just now, Derek was alert as he deliberated and said,
The cycle of fate?
Indeed.
Colin Iliad, who had experienced this before, nodded slightly and stood up. He looked around, and his gaze landed on the largest mural that he had seen lately. The mural depicted the same exact hall. There were similar columns, torches, the dark red table, complicated high-back chairs, and object layout. As for those high-back chairs, there were 11 figures sitting in them. At the very end were 2 seats, and along the table, 5 on the left and 4 on the right. The City of Silver team's eyes also followed the chief's and took in the corresponding scene. The 5 figures on the left were the beautiful silver-haired man, the red-haired and arrogantly seated man, an elder wearing a hood that exposed only his mouth, wrinkles, and beard, a dignified middle-aged man dressed in black armor, and a handsome man dressed in white robes. The 4 on the right were a black-robed mummy wrapped in bandages, a middle-aged man with facial features resembling the natives of the southern continent, a giant covered in silver armor, and a supple, beautiful, and dignified lady. The 2 high-back chairs at the very end were a man with dark black curly hair and a woman shrouded in fog. At that moment, a guardian raised his right hand and pointed at the handsome white-robed man.
His figure is made up of mysterious symbols. These symbols represent white angel auguses.
Before the guardian could finish his sentence, he suddenly let out a tragic cry as golden flames spewed out from his body. He instantly became a charred corpse, as if it would be reduced to ashes the moment it was touched. It made Demon Hunter Colin and Shepherd Lovia incapable of saving him in time.
Don't try to distinguish those symbols. They contain immense power.
Colin hurriedly warned the others, and above the gray fog, Klein was thinking of another matter.
White Angel Auguses. That's the Eternal Blazing Sun's true name. If not for the fact that the Giant King's Court itself isolates itself from projected powers, just using Jotun to read this name will attract his attention and incur divine punishment.
Amidst his thoughts, Demon Hunter Colin stabbed his swords in front of him, creating an invisible barrier. Then, this City of Silver chief identified the symbols and labels that formed those figures. He began reading it slowly and firmly from the left.
Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. War Angel, Medici. Wisdom Angel, Herabergen.
At this point, the invisible barrier that was constantly shaking suddenly stopped. This was because this name was no stranger to the people of the City of Silver. This was the true name of the Dragon of Wisdom. Could it be that the Dragon of Wisdom later became the wisdom angel next to the Lord? Similar questions arose in everyone's hearts, but Klein discovered something strange. The history of the City of Silver had records of the name Herrebergen. The language they used on a daily basis was Jotun, a language that could mobilize the surrounding forces of nature. This also meant that in the past 2,000 to 3,000 years, someone in the City of Silver had definitely read or written the name Herrebergen before, but there was no response from the god of knowledge and wisdom. The Church of Knowledge and Wisdom still wasn't able to find the forsaken land of the gods. At this moment, Colin Iliad controlled his emotions and continued reading.
Wind Angel, Leodero. White Angel, Aucases. Dark Angel, Sasrir. Evernight Goddess, Amanices. God of Combat, Badheel. Earth Mother, Omebella. God of the Dead, Salinger. God of Spiritual Creatures, Tolsna.
Although Klein had expected this, he was still somewhat stunned. Kuwai! Ere. This made him recall what the Red Angel evil spirit had once said.
The former Rose Redemption was frighteningly powerful. Amongst the 7 deities today, 6 of them were members. There was also Death, the god of spiritual creatures, and 3 kings of angels.
Rose Redemption has a close relationship with the birth of the true creator. It's impossible for you to imagine that certain people were once members of Rose Redemption, but they've since left it.
Chapter 1118. Klein's Fear. In the past, Rose Redemption could be called the Deity Alliance. But such an organization could only develop itself quietly under the might of the ancient sun god. It had to hide, and secretly scheme in the Palace of Dusk. How powerful was the ancient sun god in the past? Klein couldn't help but let out a breath as he felt deeply poignant. Issa. He examined his own tarot club and realized that, compared to the Rose Redemption, it was like child's play. Even if he counted the auxiliary members, Willa Septon, Palazoroast, Isaac Eggers, and Renette Tynecare, there was no way to compare with the Rose Redemption at its peak.
No, even if I compare it with the current watered-down version of Rose Redemption, there's still a huge gap between it and the Tarot Club. After all, its leader and convener is only a Sequence 4 saint.
Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he turned his attention to the 11 figures.
Based on their images, titles, and true names, I can confirm that the Wind Angel, Wisdom Angel, and White Angel are the current Lord of Storms, the god of knowledge and wisdom, and the eternal blazing sun. They really betrayed the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator, and they even feasted on the deity they served. The god of combat and Earth Mother are indeed survivors of the Giant King's court. One of them is the eldest son of the Giant King, and the other is his queen. Their mother and son, so that way, the fact that Fainapotter didn't directly declare war on the Lord of Storms to help Faceak makes things a little odd. It requires some thought. Also, the goddess was indeed a former subsidiary god of the annihilation demonic wolf, the goddess of misfortune, Amanices. After that ancient god perished, not only did she grasp the authority of the Evernight and successfully ascend to the throne of Sequence 0, she also single-handedly destroyed all the descendants of Phlegraea, sealed the Antigonus family's angel within the nation of the Evernight, and used the Mother of the Sky's body as her vessel for a descent. That's ruthless.
As a blessed of Evernight, Klein subconsciously raised his head to look around when he thought of this, afraid that his inner thoughts would leak out to the outside world. After entering the foggy town and learning that Antigonus and the Mother of the Sky were the descendants of the ancient god Phlegraea, Klein had a certain idea as to the true identity of the Evernight goddess. After all, in the history of the City of Silver, it clearly stated that the annihilation demonic wolf controlled the authority of the Evernight and had many strange powers. Combined with the Antigonus family's possession of the seer pathway, and the Mother of the Sky of the nation of the night clearly belonging to Evernight, Klein suspected that the annihilation demonic wolf Phlegraea was an ancient god that had mixed 2 non-neighboring pathways beyond her characteristics. Therefore, he was extremely crazy and almost irrational. His goal was to destroy and corrupt everything. Heta the Nernarkoik way. Hence he guessed that the Evernight goddess might have something to do with the ancient god Phlegrea. From Grozel's travels, he learned that one of the two subsidiary gods of the demonic Wolf King had gone missing after he perished, while the other had submitted to the Phoenix ancestor. Furthermore, that true name corresponded to Death of the Fourth Epoch, Mr. Azek's father. With that, he could vaguely connect the goddess of misfortune Amanices to the Evernight goddess. However, due to his temporary status as a blessed of Evernight, he didn't dare think too much about it. Instead, he focused his attention elsewhere. At this moment, when he saw her real name, he wasn't too shocked. Instead, he felt relieved and felt as though he were on firm ground. In addition, he was even more fearful of the Evernight goddess.
Because she didn't want the ancient god Phlegrea to be revived, the goddess controlled the various matters of the seer pathway, preventing beyonders who aren't cleared by her to advance further. That's right, that ecclesiastic in Afternoon Town mentioned who tempted Dark Angel Sazrir, the left hand of God, and the deputy of the divine kingdom, but he couldn't say the name, as if it had been erased. Isn't this a demonstration of concealment powers? Other than a place like the Giant King's court, there's no way to say the names Evernight Goddess and Amanices together. Even if one did, no one would be able to hear it. There are two people who convened Rose Redemption. One is Dark Angel Sazrir, and the other is the goddess. Apart from the venue where the ploy was conceived, it's filled with the forces of concealment. In other words, the goddess had single-handedly directed the fall of the ancient sun god, started the cataclysm, and ended the third epoch. Compared to her, be it Adam or Aman, they are still far from her. How could such a true deity be so easily trapped by Adam's arrangements and be unable to interfere with matters of the real world? Although it's not a conspiracy where something the goddess yearns for the most is used, making her willingly walk into a trap, how can the goddess who wields the powers of concealment and plotted the death of the City of Silver creator be unprepared? Also, what does this is also in line with his thoughts mean? Who does he refer to? Those Saul Niemid. After understanding so much hidden history, will I digest the scholar of your potion on the spot once I drink it?
With this in mind, Klein raised his right hand and rubbed his temples, forcing himself to focus his thoughts elsewhere.
When that ecclesiastic phantom mentioned the fourth king of angels, it self-destructed. Was it because the remaining three became true gods? However, the residents of the City of Silver would occasionally use the names Bethale and Hera Bergen, so why wasn't there an anomaly? Then, what is the difference? The strongest among the kings of angels, the left hand of God, Sazrir. Why did he disappear into the rivers of history? Perhaps he is one of the present-day evil gods, the true creator, the dark side of the universe, or the mother tree of desire. There are remnants of the godhood of degeneracy outside the hall. Was this left behind by him? Yes, the birth of the true creator is related to the Rose Redemption. How will he react when he sees the murals in this hall?
With a thought, Klein cast his gaze at Shepherd Elder Lovia. The lady looked a little lost. She didn't seem to understand the titles and names, but she recognized a portion of them. For example, Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. She had become a believer of the true creator in the temple ruins left behind by Ouroboros. Derek also stole a glance at Elder Lovia, but he didn't notice any obvious changes in her emotions. As the son of the Tarot Club, Derek was one of the people present who knew the situation of the outside world the most. Furthermore, he had long known who the kings of angels were. He suspected that 3 of them had later become deities. At this moment, he was the least confused and perplexed. He was only slightly shocked at Rose Redemption's level. This was more exaggerated than he had imagined.
It's no wonder the Lord perished.
Derek was first enlightened before he felt his heart turn heavy. At this moment, he swept his gaze and saw the chief's face turn pale and ugly. He even muttered a few words softly.
This is impossible. Impossible.
As far as I can remember, the chief has never lost his composure like this. Did he think of the Lord perishing due to Rose Redemption? He can't accept that. He will never return. However, he had long learned of this from me.
Just as Derek was feeling puzzled, he discovered that, aside from his tightly pursed lips, the chief's expression had returned to normal. In the minds of the other members of the exploration team, the prophecy they had previously learned in Afternoon Town appeared. Omnipotent Lord, I repent, tempted Sasrir. The kings often came to the palace belonging to the dusk to conspire. It was already too late by the time I discovered all of this. Degeneration, bloodshed, darkness, rot, murders, corruption, and shadows had already drowned this piece of land. A huge calamity will begin here. Chaim, who was holding the unshadowed crucifix, took a long while to calm his emotions. He said in a slightly hoarse voice,
This is the place belonging to the dusk. These are the subsidiary gods and kings of angels during the second epoch. They plotted everything, causing a huge calamity to happen. They made the Lord forsake this land.
Colin Iliad pulled out the two swords in front of him and half turned around, calmly replying,
Most likely.
Upon hearing the chief's answer, Antayana asked anxiously,
If we can figure out what exactly happened back then, do we have a chance to please the Lord and let him look at this land again?
At that moment, Derek seemed to see a trace of pity and sadness in the chief's eyes. He heard him acknowledge and say,
Perhaps.
The other team members pleaded with burning eyes.
Then let's continue exploring.
This was the closest the City of Silver had gotten to having a glimmer of hope over the past 2,000 to 3,000 years. None of them wished to let it go, even if they had to sacrifice their lives for it. Colin Iliad slowly surveyed the area and said,
Don't forget the principles to uphold during explorations. Don't act rashly at any time. Having confirmed that this place is related to redemption, we can always come a second time, a third time, or even more. There's no need to be so impatient.
Upon hearing his words, the other members of the exploration team calmed down. They replied one after another,
Yes, Your Excellency.
Under the arrangements of Demon Hunter Colin, the remaining members split up into small groups and carefully searched the hall. They didn't discover anything else that was valuable beyond the murals. Of course, it wasn't that there was no such thing. This was, after all, a divine kingdom of an ancient god. What seemed like an ordinary long table, chairs, stone pillars, and torches might have special effects when taken outside. Furthermore, those effects could last for a very long period of time. Alas, it wasn't convenient for the City of Silver's expedition team to bring them around, as they lacked practical value. As for the other murals, they were profiled from different angles of the main murals. When combined, they formed a three-dimensional scene. After completing the search, Derek and company gathered again and followed the chief to the exit at the back of the hall. There was a gray-blue door with a single pane. With a 10-meter-tall door between the two of them, Colin Iliad carefully observed for a while before finally saying,
There's a powerful guard outside.
Chapter 11:19, Tacit Cooperation. Upon hearing the chief's words, Shepherd Lovia immediately raised her question.
Just like the two silver knights at the front gate of the king's court. It won't take the initiative to attack targets outside a certain range.
Colin Iliad nodded slightly and said,
At least that's how it seems to be at the moment.
They were already near the exit, but the guard outside had no reaction. This meant that the other party didn't possess real intelligence or spirituality. It was very likely that they were objects that came to life. Without waiting for the other members to speak, Demon Hunter Colin continued,
Huge, heavy.
After obtaining the corresponding information, the City of Silver's group formed a tacit understanding. A team opened up a distance from the exit, but they faced towards the door. It was protected by Shepherd Elder Lovia. As the bait to attract the guards, a team took the corresponding holy oil from the chief and smeared it across the ground at the exit. Haim, who held the unshadowed crucifix, and Demon Hunter Colin stood by the side of the door and used the stone columns to hide. Then Colin Iliad sheathed one of his swords onto his back and took out a small metal bottle, gulping down the liquid inside. His aura rapidly faded away and wasn't obvious anymore. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to discover his existence. This was another setup. Haim was in the open while the demon hunter was hidden. After another 10 seconds, Shepherd Lovia stretched out her right hand and grabbed at thin air. Her silver-gray hair was dyed a deep blue color. The wind howled as the grayish-blue door opened. Right on the heels of that, heavy footsteps could be heard, causing the entire hall to shake. A giant covered in iron-colored armor rushed into the hall with a halberd in hand. Its exposed parts didn't show any flesh or blood, as though they were made of metal. Behind the black mask was a dark red glow. If it didn't move and stood there, it wouldn't be any different from a statue. Tap! 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 The shaking in the hall became more and more obvious. The giant statue suddenly threw out the halberd in its hand, stirring up a hurricane that tore towards Derek and company at the door. Boom! The halberd struck an invisible barrier as the illusory ripples rapidly spread out. In front of Shepherd Lovia, an illusory figure that wore silver armor had appeared at some point in time. It stabbed its great sword into the crack on the floor. Tap! 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 The giant statue didn't stop as it ran into the hall. At that moment, a whistling sound was heard under its feet as its massive body jerked backward. It had stepped on the spot that was smeared with holy oil. As the giant statue fell, the crimson light in its eye suddenly bloomed as an invisible force appeared and held it up. Suddenly, a blinding white light shot out from the unshadowed crucifix, accurately hitting the giant statue's only eye. The dark red color dimmed. Demon Hunter Colin leaped up and held the same sword with both hands, plunging it down like an eagle swooping down at its prey. Dawn appeared as they converged on the straight sword, making it exceptionally huge. It even exceeded Colin Iliad's height. With a poof, the bright sword pierced through the gap in the giant statue's armor, stabbing into its eye. A flood of light from the dawn rushed in. With his hand still gripping the hilt of his sword, Colin Iliad exerted more force. As the giant statue fell to the ground, he pulled out his sword and leaped to the side. The giant statue lay at the door as its body emitted cracking sounds until it finally all movement. Without looking at it again, Colin turned to look outside the door. After a few seconds, he said,
"There are no other guards for now. We can handle this statue."
Derek and company quickly surrounded the giant statue and skillfully searched for materials. Above the gray fog, Klein watched the entire battle from the sidelines and was deeply impressed by the City of Silver's teamwork. According to his observation, it was unknown what metal the giant statue was made of. Its surface was covered with armor that had shocking defensive strength. It could completely ignore most attacks in battle, and it was very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, this giant statue didn't have any spirit. In other words, it was immune to the beyonder powers of the corresponding domain, such as spirit body threads control, hypnotism, frenzy, and nightmare. It was like a walking fortress that made one suspect that it was the work of the goddess of harvest. Klein believed that, if he were in their shoes, with the core powers of a bizarro sorcerer being useless, he could only rely on his two marionettes, powers to deal with the giant statue. He had no idea how the battle would develop.
The distortion and disorder powers of an Earl of the Fallen might be effective, but I might not be able to finish it as fast as the City of Silver's expedition team. A team of Beyonders with a tacit understanding will be able to produce the effect of 1 + 1 = 2. Yes, that chief's confidence and timing, as well as his decisiveness in his attack, was also key.
Klein nodded slightly, feeling a sense of admiration. If this were really a live stream, then he might not be able to help but send a gift as a tip. Of course, there was a high chance that it was just a thought. After taking away the most valuable item on the giant statue, the City of Silver's expedition team proceeded forward. They followed the corridor outside and entered another hall. Just like that, they weaved through the layers of palaces, towers, and different corridors, in an attempt to find more clues, as well as the entrance to the sea as described by the outsider Jack. Regardless of whether they believed the boy's words, they couldn't help but look forward to the dark blue sea behind the giant king's court. On the other side of the sea, there were kingdoms where humans flourished. There were no monsters hidden in the darkness. The sun rose and set, and lightning only appeared when it rained. People had all sorts of food there. During this process, the City of Silver's expedition team didn't encounter many enemies. Most of them were statues that had come to life. A small number of them were evil spirits, formed by the combination of remnant emotions and the power of dusk. The latter was unable to put up any resistance against the unshadowed crucifix. The fool Klein above the gray fog nodded slightly, expressing his acceptance of the current situation.
That's normal. After the giant king perished, this place already belonged to the ancient sun god. It's unlikely that there will be a large number of giant powerhouses and mystical items left behind. When the kings of angels were conspiring, they definitely eliminated any unnecessary troubles ahead of time. Once the ancient sun god was eaten up, the ownership of this place was a mystery. Perhaps it was abandoned. In short, there aren't many foreseeable demigods or items. Well, without the unshadowed crucifix, those evil spirits will be very troublesome. The City of Silver's expedition team might not be able to advance so smoothly, making it impossible for them to advance so far unless an angel leads a team or activates a Grade 0 sealed artifact.
When the unshadowed crucifix returned to Derek, the City of Silver's expedition team was already very close to the tallest building in the giant king's court. The dusk here was extremely dense, as though it came from that palace.
Once we leave this hall, we should come to the wing of the giant king's residence.
Demon Hunter Colin got his bearings and direction before pointing ahead. Shepherd Elder Lovia nodded. Finally, there was some irresistible hope in her expression. Derek's heart beat faster, and he could no longer control his excitement. Then, he was placated by Antiona. After composing themselves, the people from the City of Silver entered the hall in front of them and saw that there were oil paintings hanging on both sides. These oil paintings depicted different giants. Some held bone flutes, some carried wind chimes, while others carried a 7-string guitar that matched their height. As the City of Silver's expedition team arrived, the giants in the oil paintings suddenly came to life. They began playing their instruments, producing a beautiful tune. The light of dusk in the hall lit up a little. More and more food appeared on the long tables around them as they glowed with a tempting glisten, effusing a very tempting fragrance.
Roasted chicken, roasted goose, fish with honey baste. Is this a dinner banquet for the giant king's court? But aren't the sizes of those chickens, geese, goats, and fish too large? The work of the goddess of harvest.
With a glance, Klein confirmed that the food that appeared was an illusion. After all, the giant king's court no longer had any ingredients, nor did it possess anyone who could envision or create them.
This is normal food.
Hayem, who was holding Thunder God's roar, stared straight at one of the long tables. His Adam's apple bobbed.
Maybe.
Derek sniffed and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Apart from the black-faced grass, they had never seen normal food. The meat that the monsters roasted was of different colors, but they also tasted equally as bad. It could even poison them. Demon Hunter Colin stared for a few seconds before sighing.
They're all fake. Don't come into contact with them, or there might be unnecessary accidents.
Other than Lovia, the team from the City of Silver retracted their gaze with great difficulty. They followed the chief all the way to the exit of the hall. After a series of inspections, Colin Iliad inserted his swords into the ground and pushed open the heavy door. A crack appeared as rich orange light shone inside. As the gap grew bigger, the towering palace gradually became clear. Then, the people from the City of Silver heard a crashing sound. At this moment, Colin drew out a sword and suppressed the restlessness in his team members' hearts. He then drew out his other sword and slowly walked out of the hall. Derek and the others followed cautiously. After completely bathing in the light of dusk, they looked to the left at the same time. There were railings formed from stone pillars. Beyond the railings, there was an orange-red cloud that was gently ebbing at the distance. On the endless swath of dark blue, they emitted crashing sounds. There was no need for anyone to explain. At the same time, the members of the City of Silver's exploration team recalled the records in the book and Jack's description. A term flashed in their minds. Pala, the sea. Chapter 1120, Court Chaser. The dark blue, boundless sea that ebbed gently and seemed to contain infinite life was presented to members of the City of Silver's expedition team. It was no longer a record written down in ancient books, nor was it a combination of words spoken by outsiders. Although it was still very far away, it seemed like contact was possible. Wah! The wine-red-haired Antiona watched in a daze. She opened her mouth, as though she wanted to say something, but in the end, all she said was the words,
The sea.
Just as she finished speaking, a silver crack suddenly appeared on her forehead. The crack shot up rapidly, instantly splitting Antiona into two halves. Warm and bright red blood gushed out, splashing across Derek's face. Without a sound, more silvery white light shot out from her body, splitting her body into countless small pieces of flesh. The reveling face full of hope was like a puzzle that had fallen to the ground, splattering everywhere. It was only at this moment that Demon Hunter Colin reacted. He brandished his two swords and slashed them diagonally outwards, as though he was dealing with invisible enemies. Clang, clang, clang! Silver light flashed, and the sound of metal reverberating echoed. The morning sun around Colin Iliad shattered and scattered in chaos. At this moment, the silver phantom behind Shepherd Lovia had already taken a step forward and stabbed the blurry giant sword into the ground. Clang, clang, clang! As they surrounded the people of the City of Silver, the streaks of silver light appeared in different spots, trying their best to cut through the invisible barrier around them, like insects struggling in amber. Clang, clang, clang! The dense, sometimes thick, silver light constantly appeared, causing the defensive powers of the expedition team to tremble, as though it would shatter at any moment. However, be it Demon Hunter Colin, Shepherd Lovia, or Derek, they couldn't find any traces of the enemy. The fool above the gray fog was just about to give a certain reminder when the chief of the six-member council seemed to realize something and crossed his two swords in front of him. Clang! The gigantic silver beam struck the two swords, causing Demon Hunter Colin's feet to sink into a solid stone slab. Hive Feet took this opportunity and roared,
Unshadowed Domain.
Upon hearing the chief's reminder, Derek didn't hesitate and stabbed his finger on the thorns of the unshadowed crucifix, doing so without any regard for the pain. As his blood oozed out, clear, bright, pure, and blazing light suddenly exploded, enveloping the entire area between the two buildings. There wasn't a single shadow in this area that could hide. Nothing else could be hidden. Light had become the ruler of this region. A huge figure quickly outlined itself on the side of the giant king's palace. It was wearing silver full-body armor and was nearly 5 meters tall. The flickering light behind the mask was either deep red or orange. And unmistakably, there was a single vertical eye there. Hujaha, this was a giant who was still alive. He didn't wait for the enemy to enter a certain range before attempting to attack, implying that he had sufficient intelligence. Unlike the other silver-armored knights, the giant's bracer had bright patterns on it. On the right was a blood-red color that circled around his arm, and at the same spot on the left, it was adorned with black spots. The giant knight raised his broadsword and pointed at everyone in the City of Silver. He said in a thunderous voice,
How dare you barge into the king's court and disturb Lord Sasrir's slumber?
Sasrir, Dark Angel Sasrir. The fool Klein above the gray fog was alarmed when he heard that. He subconsciously sat up straight. The former left hand of God, the deputy of the divine kingdom, the leader of the kings of angels, one of the two leaders of Rose Redemption, hadn't disappeared into the river of history. He was sleeping deep in the giant king's court, sleeping in the residence of the giant king.
Why did he choose to enter a state of slumber?
Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he subconsciously cast his gaze towards the palace that the giant knight was guarding. It was the tallest and most magnificent building in the giant king's court. The dusk's light seemed to transform into something corporeal that covered its surface, dyeing it with a clear sense of decline. It gave off the feeling that the sun had set and an eternal eventide was coming. Wahitin on both sides were steeples, while on the other side were spires. The front door was a double door that opened outwards, with gray and blue as the main colors. Its height exceeded 10 meters, and it was covered with symbols, labels, and patterns. It looked stately and mysterious. There was a pitch-black socket on the left side of the door at a height of 3 to 4 meters tall. It was equivalent to an adult's fist. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly thought of the dream divination he had done in the past. Back then, he had seen the same scene, and the medium he had used for the divination was the Giant's key he had obtained from Vice Admiral Iceberg.
Is that the key to opening the Giant King's residence?
As he extended his hand, he tried to use his true vision to pass through the obstruction of the building to see the situation inside the palace. Unfortunately, he failed. The iron-black key, which was the size of a 7-string guitar, landed in front of him. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin suddenly said before the Giant Knight attacked,
You're a court chaser.
The Giant Knight's broadsword didn't cleave down. Instead, he paused for 1 second and said in a low voice,
After all this time, to think that there's someone who can still remember court chasers. I'm the leader of all the chasers, the light color Muskogan, and I later followed Lord Sasrier. I once hunted powerful dragons, elves, devils, demonic wolves, phoenixes. Today, you are honored to die under my blade.
This light color didn't soften his attitude. He hunched his body slightly and held his sword with both hands. Like a flying meteor, he rushed towards the people from the City of Silver with heavy footsteps at high speeds. Due to the existence of the unshadowed domain, he could no longer hide his body like before. Just as Colin Iliad, Lovia, and company determined that Muskogan's attack would arrive in 1 second, this Giant Knight suddenly stopped his silver broadsword slash midway. Demon Hunter Colin, who wasn't in Lovia's evil spirit's defensive circle, suddenly had a premonition of danger. Without any hesitation, he lunged to the side. Boom! A silver ray of light suddenly emerged from the spot where he had been standing, destroying everything from within. This attack was so strange, like it was generated by the void itself, Generi. At the same time, there was also a change in Colin Iliad, who had ducked to the ground. His clothes were torn into pieces and cloth by his rapidly expanding muscles. In just a blink of an eye, this demon hunter had turned into a grayish-blue giant with bluish-black lines warped around him. At his forehead was a deep black crack. Every inch of him contained immense power, infinite mystery, and a strange psyche influence. If a Beyond or Under Sequence 4 saw this scene, they would definitely suffer from a strong backlash. Their brains might suffer an excruciating pain that would cause them to lose their minds. Even their spirituality would be corrupted. And if they couldn't withstand such an influence, going crazy, losing control, or even sudden death were certain outcomes. This was the incomplete mythical creature form of a demigod. Originally, Colin Iliad didn't dare to release this form due to the influence of the twilight in the Giant King's court. But now he realized that in the unshadowed domain, the feeling of decline had weakened significantly. Aro akulu abilan pa hide. He then raised the 2 swords that had enlarged in size as well. With them covered in the light of dawn, he fought fiercely with the light color Muskogan in the domain that was enveloped in light and shadows. Clang! 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 The 3 swords of the giants clashed and separated from time to time. Although Colin Iliad was at a disadvantage, he still managed to withstand the barrage of attacks from the King's Court Chaser's leader. From time to time, he would feel a strong sense of danger. Then, without any warning, he would either duck or roll in another direction. And at this moment, silver beams of light would always appear from the inside and outside. Derek had already closed his eyes. Ignoring the loss of blood, he tried his best to maintain the unshadowed domain. Haim and another Dawn Paladin similarly didn't dare open their eyes. They helped shepherd Elder Lovia and slowly moved the group towards the palace without exiting the protective domain. If not for the help of the silver-armored Night Evil Spirit, they would have long been diced into small pieces of flesh and blood by the storm of light that swept the area. That light color Muskogan alone had placed the City of Silver's expedition team into a precarious position, with no chance of counterattacking.
as expected of the leader of the king's court chasers. This should be the strongest force beneath subsidiary gods, or, in other words, angels. Compared to the demon hunter, the Silver Knight has several more terrifying beyonder powers.
Above the gray fog, the fool Klein held the sea god's scepter and carefully observed the battle. He quickly figured out the aspect in which light color Muskogen was powerful in. Firstly, his defensive power can be transformed into a full-body silver armor set. Secondly, it can be used to hide and conceal himself with the light, hiding any malicious intent. Thirdly, the condensed sword of dawn isn't something that can be maintained for a short period of time. It can be used as a normal weapon, sufficiently sharp, and good at cleansing. Fourth, it can create some sort of thin silver-white sword. It has the ability to teleport, and it can bypass most barriers to attack the target directly, and even cause it to erupt from within the target's body. Furthermore, this thin silver-white sword condensed without any warning, making it difficult to predict.
This is a saint who's extremely good at fighting head-on. If it wasn't for the rich experience and strong intuition of the City of Silver's chief, he would have been in danger due to the suppression effect from being of the same pathway when fighting in his mythical creature form. If it were me, I might have already been killed. Of course, I wouldn't fight head-on with the leader of the king's court chasers. From the current situation, because the evil spirit needs to protect its shepherd, there's no way for it to directly participate in the battle. The City of Silver's expedition team has almost no chance of winning. Yes, they're already slowly retreating. Very rational. If it really doesn't work, perhaps Mr. Fool will have to deliver lightning punishment. However, the true creator should still be watching. My lightning storm might not be able to quickly resolve Muskogen.
Klein's thoughts raced when he suddenly thought of a problem.
How did light-color Muskogen, who wasn't an angel, survive since the end of the Second Epoch? He's neither a demoness, vampire, nor undying. And from him possessing reason, as well as the ability he displays in battle, he doesn't have beyonder characteristics of other pathways mixed in him.